evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the broadcast again this evening. Thank you for joining us across the different platforms. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator.
I think we'll just go straight into the program this evening, sir, as we have quite a few things to touch on. But again, thank you very much to all the guests. I can see some people are on YouTube as well. It's an interactive session. Please do remember to put your comments in the chat if there's any question you want to pass across to Prof, and I will share that straight away with him. So we pretty much dedicated the program last week to the passing of Her Majesty, the Queen. But we knew that there would be quite a bit of reaction over the course of the week. And we've seen different reactions from different quarters from some countries choosing to stay on the fence regarding their position with the royal family and what happened with King Charles III now being there, and to others who are talking about potentially holding a referendum on this point. Sir, do you want to share with us your views on the reactions so far to the passing of Her Majesty, particularly from some of the Commonwealth nations?
I think this is one of those occasions when an event becomes a hanger on which history is revisited. As we said last week, the death of Her Majesty was and is a global issue. When you even look at the number of heads of states who have said they will attend the funeral and who are prepared to be bussed from one venue to another rather than the usual state limousine that they are used to. It shows the significance of her death. And I'm then not surprised that her death has now allowed narratives that go beyond her as an individual. And perhaps I should say this justifies this podcast. A few times I have had to remind our audience that actually we are the voice of the global South, and you will expect views to be expressed on this channel, which you won't get from the global media. However, having said that, I must say, yes, you expect that the BBC will be absolutely positive and full of praise and full of positive narratives. You will expect that. The CNN, I suspect, because of their own colonial past, has actually been prepared to accommodate views which were not all that positive about Her Majesty. British society, the British Empire. You even had Christina Amanpour saying she hopes that King Charles III would allow the issue of reparation to be revisited, that the British society, the British government still owe a large part of the global society apologies, reparations, and what have you, for what happened during the colonial period. And to that extent, expect on our podcast channel a view that reflects the feelings of those of us who are victims of slavery, victims of colonialism, and now I'm probably going to step on some of your toes, victims of neo-colonialism. You will expect to hear strains of those in my own views. Some of you will say, just like others say, oh, come on, the empire is dead. Colonialism is dead. Why are you not going to? But is colonialism really dead? Are we really in control of our governments? There is, I was having a discussion with some colleagues during the week, and we decided to do a mental exercise about heroes of African liberation. And you'll be surprised as to how many of those heroes are dead heroes. Some not even allowed to lead the liberation struggle to successful completion. Some who were allowed, but were not allowed to stay there for too long before they were overthrown with the connivance of agents of the colonial state. And of course, all of us are living in systems that were deliberately set up to ensure that we probably will forever remain in the global south. Lee Kuan Yew, former Prime Minister of Singapore, who was lucky to have been able to move his country from the third world to the first world, was asked, how did he do it? How did he escape that trap? Singapore was supposed to be locked into. And he said, we were lucky. Singapore was lucky. We had nothing. Nobody expected us to become anything. Therefore, they never paid any attention to what we were doing. And so we managed to escape, to develop. And of course, because he had the brightest and the best brains in Singapore to become, to ascend to the global north. So the death of Her Majesty has now brought up all these debates, some in language that I will not repeat on this program, but reflected the anger, the hostility that people still felt about the empire. And I'm not talking about just Africans. There were Irish groups dancing the river dance, if you know what the river dance is. Do that, although the Kenyans will tell you that the Queen was already on the throne when the British government, her representatives in Kenya, introduced concentration camps in order to quell the Mau Mau rebellion, which was a reaction to the white colonialism, to the grabbing of Kikuyu land, and to the injustices there, that she was already on the throne and that there was nothing that she did about it. Even the Attorney General, who was British, of Kenya at that time wrote in his memoirs that those concentration camps were as bad as what Hitler did in Europe. And yet, till today, the British haven't paid any reparations, any compensation to Kenya for what they did there. The argument that has been put forward is that, well, the Queen reigns, she doesn't rule, and that therefore she cannot be held responsible. Well, it is true. However, she enjoyed the perks of colonial riches. The crown, it is still called the imperial crown, by the way, but the crown that was put on her head, coronation, had all the diamonds from South Africa and from India. So if she was going to accept, she had no choice anyway. But then also she should have no choice about people who were victims of what the British did all over the world. She should also bear part of the vicarious, it's not direct, but part of the vicarious responsibilities. I listened to the Governor General of Canada, who happened to be the first native Canadian, or the first original Canadian to be made Governor General. And she spoke with dignity. While mourning the Queen, whom, she met the Queen several times, was a gracious lady, a very dignified lady. He said, but there are outstanding issues concerning the treatment of the original Canadians that have been left unresolved and that are still there as issues that are alive. No compensation for their children that were forcibly taken and sent to churches, schools, where they were forcibly converted, their names were forcibly changed, and some of them never came back. That was also the Irish experience. So to that extent, I think that even we scholars, academics on this program should use the death of the Queen to reflect on unfinished business. There's no way in which you plant a tree and you will be expecting different vegetation and different fruits. If you plant a society that's based on conflict and they're supposed to generate conflict, don't expect that products of that society would be fawning over the death of her. Will be mourning Her Majesty without showing some reservation about what they're still going through, thanks to the system that the British left. So, having said all of that, all I will say is the British have put on a good show. Nobody does protocol like the British. I'll give that to them. The marching soldiers, the everything is what one would like to see. And may God rest her soul.
Sorry, sir. I said I want to ask a question that I have seen pop up across a lot of media channels, and that is the relevance of the Commonwealth now that the Queen is gone. How much value may have departed from the Commonwealth with the passing of the Queen?
A relevant question. And the answer is an easy one to give. The Commonwealth is still relevant in a world order that is predicated on international institutions. If a Commonwealth country is interested in a post, whether in the World Trade Organization, in the United Nations itself, in the WHO, any international institutions of which Commonwealth members are members, and there is no other Commonwealth country that wants to compete for the same office, you have a block vote of 46 countries right there and then. You could lobby. And if you are the only one interested, you've got 46 votes before any vote is even cast. So to that extent, the Commonwealth, stands there as block votes for you. And of course, since Commonwealth members then belong in other international institutions, depending on how vibrant your own campaign is, they even go ahead to campaign for you in other institutions. So that's one. Number two, when it comes to issues like, if you like, forgiveness of debt, reparations, which I have mentioned, climate change, depending on how serious your own diplomatic initiatives are, starting with the Commonwealth or starting with the African Union or starting with the European Union when Britain was there and so on, could make your campaign easy. You also have that have been put in place Commonwealth institutions or Commonwealth paradigms. There are Commonwealth scholarships. There are Commonwealth training schemes. It depends on, again, I must continue to say this, it depends on the skill of your own diplomats, how much you will get out of the Commonwealth, and to what extent you can use the Commonwealth to advance your national interests. And don't forget that given, I know it's overplayed, it's probably not as significant as the British like to think, but I still believe that there's a measure of, intensity in the relationship between Great Britain and the United States. Great Britain, as a member of the Commonwealth, if you could persuade her as to the righteousness of your cause, speaking to the United States by Britain actually strengthens or not strengthens. Well, yeah, it strengthens your case, but it also makes your case easier to put across to the rest of the world if Britain could persuade the United States on your behalf.
Thank you for that, sir. Finally, as we leave the question of the British monarchy, I want to ask a question about Prince Charles. You spoke a little bit about this last week, where you said we should. I think your words were that we should give him a chance and watch what he does. How have his outings in the last 1 week, have they changed your views at all from what you previously thought about last week, sir?
I have to laugh or smile broadly because there's a video that's been going around about his reaction when he discovered that the pen that he was using to sign the book in Northern Ireland, the ink was leaking onto his palm. And brother, the language that he was using will make a naval man blush. And it was good then to see that, he's human after all, and is capable of temper, rather than the, hand-brushed image that, we have seen in this past few. I think that was the Charles that people close to him, got to know about. He's performed admirably his role as the incoming king. He's done everything that he's supposed to do. I don't agree with him in his treatment of Harry, Prince Harry. I don't see why Prince Harry should not have been allowed to wear military uniform while following the coffin of his grandmother, because the military uniform signified the 10 years he served in the military, including 2 tons of duty in Afghanistan. The uniform was not just decorative, it's a symbol of his service. He served. And I don't see why it would have been reduced to the same level as Prince Andrew, whose behavior became an embarrassment to the royal family. And he rightly deserved to be punished. But what did Harry do that would deny him that privilege or that right? It's not even a privilege, it was a right, because he served 10 years. I mean, you cannot, I remember one British professor, when I was made a professor, he said, that is one certificate nobody can take from you. Frame it, put it on the wall. You aren't being called a professor. They cannot tomorrow come and say, you are no longer a professor. So what you earn by merit, by dint of hard work, you shouldn't be denied. And so I disagree with King Charles, who obviously will have the final say on who wears uniform, who doesn't. But apart from that, he hasn't put any foot wrong, really. And but of course, you know, yeah, how many years has he had in training? You know, 60-something years. I mean, he is 73 now. And if we assume that from the age of 20, he's been understudying the mother, you know, that's quite an apprenticeship age. He would even have been long a professor if he were in my discipline. We would have made him a professor by now.
Yes, sir. But, sir, let me move the conversation to climate change. And this is on the back of a report from the African Development Bank, where they said that Africa is losing up to 15% of GDP growth to climate change related issues. And I remember we brought it up on this program about a year ago during the COP26 event. And now we're about to hit another one. I think it's in November this year. And one is forced to ask the question, what has changed in the world since then? And if the Africa Development Bank is correct, that Africa is losing 15% of GDP growth, are we doing enough in Africa to help to fight the impact of climate change in Africa?
The unfortunate thing about climate change is that our recognition of what needs to be done, as embodied in the Edinburgh conference, came at the wrong time. Because not long after that conference came COVID-19. And of course, everybody's focus shifted away from climate change to how does one deal with this disaster? What policy issues do you put in place in order to address COVID-19? And just as the world was getting over COVID-19, the consequences of COVID-19. Of course, we then had Omicron, because I mustn't make the mistake of giving the impression that COVID-19 is gone. COVID-19 never left. It just, we human beings, human societies, I would say, have moved on to another disaster, which is the Russian-Ukrainian war. And that war is even more significant because people who had put in place stages of moving away from fossil fuels now had to go back to using COVID fuel. People who had, people who had called in mining companies and kind of laid down the law about how they would, they will run down the mining of coal. You now have to call them back to say, hold on a minute. Actually, you do have to increase your coal production, which didn't do the fight for climate change any good. The policy parameters which were going to allow countries in the north to buy credits from countries in the global south, all of a sudden had other preoccupations. So the African Development Bank is probably right. I didn't read the report, but it's probably right that about African economies losing percentages of GDP due to climate change. And it is going to happen. Do you know, 3 days ago, snow fell on one of the states, one of the northern states in Nigeria. Snow actually fell. And the reason that was highlighted was because it had never happened there before. There are other states in Nigeria where during the harmattan, snow falls on the high mountains. But, we are how many months from the harmattan? This is September. We are 3 months away from the harmattan coming, and yet snow fell. So that, you can imagine the impact on agricultural production. People who had never seen snow before, therefore they don't even know what the effect will be on the crops that they planted, whether those crops will suffer or whether they will grow. And if they grow, will it be a kind of muted growth or what? So I'm not surprised about those figures, and I'm not really sure. But in a way, I'm not an economist, so I really shouldn't go on too long on this matter. But I'm not sure whether, given the fact that we are still battling the consequences of COVID-19, we are still battling the effects of the war, whether African countries are going to, without help, put in place policy parameters to address the consequences of climate change.
Before I leave Africa, sir, let's talk about the African Union, because the organization has come up again in peace talks they had in Ethiopia between the government and the Tigrayan forces there. Do you think the African Union is doing enough in their involvement in some of these kind of challenges, disasters, government issues that we're having in different countries? Are they doing enough? This is clearly a win for them if they're able to negotiate this peace deal to the end. What is your take on that, sir?
The African Union is an international organization. And like all international organizations, its effectiveness depends on the countries you are dealing with accepting your offer to help them. The African Union has no standing troops of its own. The African Union is supposed to help to resolve conflicts and not to add to the conflict by sending in peace enforcement troops. And as long as Ethiopia or the Tigrayans are not accepting the offer of the African Union, there's very little that the African Union will do. I can cite to you many instances of civil wars in Africa where the African Union, I don't want to use the word impotent, because to use the word impotent is to convey the impression that the African Union could do something, but either through incompetence or administrative, whatever it is not achieving results. No, it's not so. It's also like blaming the United Nations for not stopping the war between Russia and Ukraine. What forces are you going to put in place to stop the Russians? You will need American forces, or you will need NATO forces. If NATO now says, no, we are not going to put forces on the ground, or we are not going to make our forces available to you, then what else can the United Nations do? So, by the time you get to this stage where the Tigrayan movement is saying they will now accept African Union intervention, that then indicates that the Tigrayan movement has come to the conclusion that their war of secession is a futile one, and they are looking for an organization to save their face. You see, international institutions are at their best when one of the parties decides to cut its losses, but it doesn't want to lose face. And therefore, you then accept, mediation by an international organization that you can say, we are not conceding to the Ethiopians, we are conceding to the African Union. At that time, the time is right for the African Union to then, and I believe that the organization itself is standing by. I say standing by because always watch or always read the fine print. Because the Tigrayans are not saying we will accept the mediation by African Union. It has put in place they must leave, that Ethiopia must lift the embargo it has put in place. It must allow food to come in, relief materials to come in unaided. When even some of those relief organizations had accused the Tigrayan movement of looting their resources to feed soldiers rather than the civilians that are put in place. We're at stage one of the mediatory efforts that are in place, because the Tigrayans will have to remove all the conditionalities they've put in place.
So let's go to the United States. One not too long ago, about a week ago, there was the remembrance of 9/11 and the challenges that the United States faced in the immediate aftermath of that horrific disaster there. But there was an event that happened, sir, where the United States, round about the same time, announced that they were going to be setting up a fund of almost $4 billion. And they were going to put that in the hands of an independent organization to disburse funds to Afghanistan. Accepted, these were funds of the Afghan government that the US had seized at the time when they were leaving the country. Do you see any conflict with the timing of the aid to Afghanistan and the remembrance of 9/11?
I mean, the direct answer to your question is no. I don't see the nexus between the two events. But, one of the cliches that we throw around is that what goes around comes around. The world has tended to associate that date, September 11th, with the crashing of those planes into the Twin Towers. But do you know that in Chile, September 11th represented the date that the Chilean military under Augusto Pinochet aided and abetted, if not instigated by the United States, overthrew a democratically elected government of Allende, where the Chilean Air Force bombed the presidential palace and killed Allende. And over, about, I think, 7,000, I'm not sure of that figure, of Chileans were killed. So when the United States said, we're not celebrate, but when the United States, commemorates September 11th, the Chileans also remember September 11 in sorrow. Because up to today, there are still about 1,500 so-called disappeared. These were people who were known to have been picked up by the military and never came back. What happened to them? There are no records. And the present Chilean president has promised that they will go through all books that are available so that at least the families can be told what happened to their loved ones during the military period under Pinochet. So really, so when I think of September 11th, on one hand, and I think what happened to the Americans, I also think of what happened, the disaster that the United States inflicted on Chile. And I think, again, as the voice of the Global South on a program like this, we should be, at least let us bring up the scale so that people
Can you hear me, sir?
I can hear you, but
okay.
It's like you can.
Fantastic. Yes,
okay.
I can hear you now, sir.
All right. When I say what goes round comes round, remember about 6 months ago that the Germans paid reparation to Namibia because of the Holocaust and genocide, which the Germans committed in what they at that time called Southwest Africa. If Europe had reacted at the way they should react on moral grounds to what the Germans did in Southwest Africa, the Holocaust that the Germans performed there, rather than ignoring it, Hitler might not have committed genocide against the Jews in Europe. Concentration camps might not have been built by Germans in Europe. But because the Germans were doing it to Africans, Europe ignored it. And so it came back home to then hunt them. So really, I think that we should educate ourselves on our own history, the history individually, the history Global South, and not hook into the narrative that makes world history sounds like whatever happens in Europe or in America, that is world history. Whatever happens in the Global South, well, too bad.
Thank you for that, sir. You've touched on the war in Ukraine in passing a few, and I want to ask some questions about that. Number one, we just talked about the African Union, and we look for organizations like that when you're trying to look for a way out. Over the last few weeks, the media has been filled with news on gains that Ukraine has been making in pushing back the Russians. Is it too early for the Russian president to be looking for a way out now? Or do you see him getting more aggressive, knowing that things are not quite going the way he thought they would go?
A very good question. A very pertinent question. I believe that this now is the time for the Pope, and I've been mentioning the Pope on this program, I think this is the time for the Pope to offer, oh no, where he can't go on a trip because, again, he's not feeling too well. Age is telling on him. However, I mean, there are ways in which diplomatic initiatives can be manifested. But I think the time is right for the Pope to offer to mediate, because, as you've rightly pointed out, the Russians are reeling on their hind heels in defeat in areas of Ukraine. Russia must not be shamed. I'm saying this not because Russian activities can be justified, not because Putin, what Putin has tried to do in Ukraine, not because it is justified, but Russia is still maybe not a superpower, but a nuclear power. You can't tell how someone like Putin will react to be shamed. Therefore, a window of opportunity must be opened where he can save his face by being seen to accept peace overtures from a moral force. Obviously, the Pope doesn't have any nuclear weapons. He doesn't have any divisions. He's just a moral force. And, you know, a conference is being held now of faith somewhere in, I think in one of these Asiatic countries. And there are representatives of Muslims, there are representatives of leaders of the Anglican faith, there are representatives of the Orthodox Church. Now, the Russian Patriarch is not there, but he has sent representatives, and the Pope is there. That may be a good platform for the Pope to send messages to Putin that Putin will be welcome in the Vatican to visit an old man. I remember, I think it's Pope John the 23rd. I always call him, with all due respect, I always call him the round Pope because, you know, he was like grandfather, round, you know, jovial, and somebody had criticized the Catholic Church. And I think that Pope said he would like to meet the man who had criticized the Catholic Church. And that if we would not meet him as the head of the Catholic Church, at least he will meet him as an old man. Nobody refuses to meet old men. So I remember that. So maybe this is the time for, this Pope Francis is not as round as Pope John the 23rd, but maybe could ask Putin to come to the Vatican to exchange views with him. And that, you know, or the Pope could start off by sending a very senior cardinal, maybe the Secretary of State, who is like his foreign minister, send him to Moscow. Now, to me, this is the right time, because Putin must now be facing the possibility of outright defeat. Dictators don't react rationally to defeat. There is another conference going on in Shanghai where Putin had met the Chinese president, the Indian prime minister. And if you listen to the language of both Putin and the Chinese, he didn't, because I think they met today, he did not. The body language did not reflect the effusiveness of the Chinese towards the Russians that was there last year. It's almost like things are not going too well. China is not going to anchor its horses on, something that may derail soon. China would not like to lose face by joining a failed alliance or a wobbly alliance. So I just believe the time is right for intervention by the Pope.
So before we leave the topic, I know we're about a minute over, but I want to ask this question. Are we seeing a strengthened NATO given the outcome of this war so far, anyway, up till this point? Are we seeing NATO living, feeling definitely our involvement in this war is what has helped Ukraine to push back thus far? And the investment that's been coming from other countries as well is what has helped Ukraine this far. And would this be a deterrent for other countries and even Russia on regrouping and saying we're going to come back out again, knowing fully well that facing the force of all these combined countries is not going to make it an easy win for them?
Well, there are lessons that I usually learned from disasters like this. And as I understand, taught in military staff colleges, they fight the last war because the lessons they are trying to draw is what lessons could they derive, could they learn from the last military conflict. So your summary is absolutely spot on. It's not only NATO, the staff colleges, but Russian staff colleges, even Chinese staff colleges. Because in all these areas, there are outstanding conflicts where people then will be learning what went wrong for Russia. Was that the right war to have picked up on? Or, as you rightly said, the activation and revitalization of NATO? Did they make the crucial factor affecting the outcome of the war? Or let us look at the way Ukraine trained its armed forces. Because it's one thing to have the equipment. I mean, the Russians had the equipment, and yet look how they're even abandoning military equipment in their retreat. So what is it about Ukrainian forces that has led them taking blows upon blows upon blows on the chin, and yet they didn't give up. They didn't retreat. No retreat, no surrender. And they've come back to make a difference in what has happened. There are so many lessons that need to be learned. And I'm sure that it's not on a program like this, you talking to an old man who never served in the military, that you will get the correct answer. they, Sandust, West Point, of these military establishments, they will be there with, both retired and on-the-spot generals as regards the right lesson to be learned, that it may create a more peaceful world. This haven't happened. That maybe no one will want to take chances at starting another, another conflict when you have arranged against them would be a range of countries and a range of institutions.
All right. Thank you very much, sir. I think that's as much as we have time for today. But I want to say thank you to those who are on YouTube. I can see some people are on YouTube, and to all that are here on Zoom. I have just shared the link to the YouTube broadcast, which will have the recording there, because some people have said they missed the sessions. And do we still have a link now that we're running on Zoom? Yes, the link has been made available now. And thank you to everybody for joining the session today. Sir, thank you very much for your time. And we will be here again next week. Thank you to all the guests who have attended today. We really do appreciate your time. And we'll be back again next week. Good night.